Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Very happy to be with you. You know, I have a long history with this Sangha, actually. You know, I don't know, maybe 25 years ago, before you were meeting in the current space, the group used to gather in the main room of the Zen Hospice Project. Some of you may remember. And it was, we made the main room available to support the development of the Sangha. So we've enjoyed a very long friendship, actually. And so today I wanted to speak a little bit about belonging, actually. And we'll see what we can discover together. So conventionally, right, when we speak about belonging, we speak about it as a sense of being recognized or a part of a family or a group or a movement or a nation. Maybe sometimes this includes shared values or beliefs or common interests. You remember Abe Maslow, right? The American psychologist who created this theory of the hierarchy of needs. And it was usually, portrayed as a pyramid. And at the base of the pyramid was, our basic survival needs. And the more complex and evolved needs were placed at the peak of the pyramid. And the need for love and belonging was at the very center of the pyramid. Essential, really, to manifesting our full capacity as humans. But beyond all this, these theories of psychological needs, I think in each of us, in each of our hearts, we long to belong. Yeah. We know, right, that psychosocial belonging helps us to manage stress and our behavior issues. And usually we feel when we have the support of others, when we feel we're not so alone, we're generally more resilient. We have a sense of belonging helps us to more effectively face the difficulties of our life. But belonging is necessary for survival. I mean, without a sense of belonging, we would have perished as a species a long time ago. And that's why I think when we feel like we're on the margins or we feel like we've been exiled from a greater community, it can feel really devastating for us, almost like we won't survive. I was with my 3 grandchildren this past week, and I was reminded how infants, all of us as infants, need to belong in order to survive. My son and his wife, they recently adopted 2 new children, and I was meeting them for the first time. And my granddaughter Nico, who I've known since her birth, came running up to me, yelling, "Grandpa, Grandpa." And when the other 2 saw this, they immediately fell in line, yelling, "Grandpa, Grandpa," even though it was my first time in meeting them. So I think as children, we're kind of encoded, if you will, with this need to attach to in a healthy way to a caregiver. And we know, right? Probably from our own experience, because those of us who didn't have healthy attachment, and that's most people actually, in our young lives, we often suffer from low self-esteem or a negative worldview, or maybe we don't have a lot of basic trust. And we might walk around with the perception of rejection. that everybody else is included except me. That's been the story of my life. So our longing to belong, even when we make unskillful attempts at it, like when we compare ourselves to others or when we're in competition with others, I think actually these are often attempts to make contact with what we feel has been lost, or maybe what we never got to have. Without, well, but I think belonging is not just about togetherness. I don't think it's just about getting our psychosocial needs met. I think belonging is freedom. You know, belonging is intrinsic, we could say, to our most essential, most fundamental nature. I mean, who we actually are, is indivisible. It can't be broken into parts. It can manifest in a myriad of ways, thousands of ways, as all kinds of possibilities and qualities. But these facets, they're not separate from the whole. You know, like the analogy goes, no more than the waves are separate from the ocean. Or like when I think about this, I think of us being one body, actually. And if you cut your left hand, your right hand reaches out and cares for it immediately. Immediately. It doesn't pause. It doesn't ask, what's your political, affiliation, or do you have good health insurance, or, what's your belief system? It just cares for it. It's the most natural thing, right? So I think belonging is in the nature of our nature. And all of our experiences in life, including the one we're having right now, are kind of, I think of them as invitations to belonging. Yet most of us, if you're like me, at least at times, we live in a delusion of our separateness. And to me, this is particularly prevalent in the West. And we believe that we need to be separate in order to be individual. And I think this is one of the core wounds in our culture. This leads to isolation and domination, and not the good kind. Domination over others and over our planet. It leads to war that we're witnessing right now. And feeding this fire of separation, it leads to so much unnecessary suffering. The other day, I read something that just broke my heart. It really broke my heart. I read that nearly 1/3 of young people say that they have no trusted adults in their life. 1/3. And it's probably higher in communities of people who are living on the margins. I mean, the world's never been more connected. I mean, look at us, connected via Zoom, and yet people are lonelier than ever. I was in London a while back, and there's a minister of loneliness in England who's working to address this epidemic experience of loneliness. And in the parks in London now, there are benches that have signs on them. And some of them say chat benches. And so if you want to just be quiet, well, you of course can go to a bench and sit on the bench by yourself. But if you want to connect with people, you go and sit on one of these chat benches. And maybe it's a total stranger, but you can visit with them. And it's a way to just sort of address this rampant loneliness that's there. I don't know about you, but my experience of separation, it amplifies the feelings of vulnerability and fear and grasping and aversion. And this feeling separate is a kind of existential trance in which we've forgotten about the wholeness of our being. I mean, we're not separate from others, not from our nature, not from the essential truth of reality, not from the beauty and horror of our humanity. We never were, and we never will be. And at the same time, I want to express my respect for how hard it is, how difficult it is to be human. My question, always in practice, is how do I move toward the light of absolute truth and still accept and honor my very human nature? How do I face the popularism and the climate catastrophe of our time and the religious divisions and the racism and the political polarization and, I don't know, the patriarchy of the gender oppression? All of these and more. We could come up with more. We could add to that list. How do I recognize that there are certainly actions and groups of actors to which I don't feel I want to belong? But I think we belong even to this. And that brings with it a responsibility to address the suffering of our world with wisdom and compassion and integrity. You know, I years ago helped to lead a retreat at Auschwitz-Birkenau, 150 people sitting on the tracks of Birkenau from all over the world. It was horrific and also extraordinary. And later I remember reading an article by an interview with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and he said something extraordinary. He said, he was out Auschwitz, and he said, I'm so glad I wasn't born to be a guard. He said, I think I would have done horrible things. And what he was pointing to is, if he'd been born into a certain set of conditions and raised with a certain kind of value system, and born at a particular time, if he'd walked the path of those guards, he would be one. And it was very humble to me that he said that. And his dear friend, the wonderful, joyful Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he introduced the world to that beautiful Zulu phrase, Ubuntu, which usually is translated, broadly anyway, as we are because we belong. And this belonging, it's not just to other beings, other humans, or four-legged creatures even. We belong to the rocks and the plants and the boundless sky and the great oceans. And also to all the misery on our planet. We belong to all of it. Our practice, in our Buddhist practice, we know from our study that interconnectedness, let's call it, is a central tenet underlying everything in practice. Every person, place, thing is entirely dependent on other persons, places, and things. And the necessary conditions that allow us to exist. And this isn't just some abstract spiritual idea. An apple seed can't bear fruit. right? It needs the right conditions. It needs moisture and sunshine and nutrients and raindrops. And only in that way can it grow and bear fruit. Nothing can be sustained independently. And I think every time we connect with those rays of sunshine and those drops of rain, it reminds us of that cycle of our belonging. Everything, I should say, depends on everything else. I mean, look at us sitting here together. I mean, we're only able to exist because of others. I mean, the clothes we're wearing, right? They came from somewhere else. And the existence that we're sharing right now, it's only there because of these conditions that we live in. Someone grows crops and harvests them and brings the crops to market, and maybe someone else makes our meals for us. And it's repeated again and again. I teach a lot at the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe. And before every meal, we make a chant. And let's see if I can remember it. It goes something like, earth, water, fire, air, and space combine to make this food. Numberless beings gave their lives and labors that we may eat. May we be nourished that we may nourish life. And we do that before every meal. So to get this deep sense of belonging, it involves living with the paradox of two truths, right? Which we speak about a lot, the absolute truth of our connection with everything, that we're not separate, but also the relative truth, right? That each of us comes into this world in different conditions, right? And have different histories, and those differences shape our identities. So we're not separate, but we're also not the same. And I think our freedom depends on remembering that. And one way that we experience and skillfully practice this is in community. I mean, community plays a central role in Buddhist practice, right? We speak of the three treasures, the three jewels: Buddha, the capacity in each of us to awaken; Dharma, the teachings or the path or the truth, the way; and Sangha, the community of practitioners. And I'm the way. I think of these as a three-legged stool, and if we only practice the first two, well, it's a pretty wobbly stool. Sangha is important. Taking refuge, to me at least, isn't a bypass or removing ourselves from life. It's not a running away from the harsh realities. It's a way we come closer to ourselves and each other. And it's not easy. I mean, humans have always formed themselves into groups, right? I mean, the tribes and cultures and organizations. Most of us have belonged to some of them at least. And Sangha is also about relationships, but it's not about replacing our dysfunctional families with a new version. Sangha is more like a mirror to me. It's more like a growing experience through which we see each other in fresh ways. And each person in the Sangha, each of us sitting here, we have a function. And to me, that the real function is to be completely ourselves. So I think of Sangha as a way that we remember ourselves home. And this relationship of Sangha, it's not, well, it's less about determination, right? About some kind of outcome, about how we, or how we should behave or any of that. And it's more about discovery. And it's a journey, right, of continuous discovery, requiring courage and flexibility, and where we learn to open and take risks and maybe forgive constantly. It's not extra. But at the same time, we have to be realistic about Sangha and aware of the times and conditions we live in. My friend Norman Fisher has a wonderful way of talking about it. He says that there's a great coherence to Buddhist practice. You know, it has its own logic and wisdom, and that's been developed over 2,600 years, and it fits together beautifully, nice, neatly, tidy. But on the other hand, you know, people are not so coherent. You know, when we give ourselves permission to look honestly at our lives and at each other, we find a lot of contradictions. I was with my daughter the other night, and she said, "You know, Papa, when we were young, you didn't impose Buddhist practice on us, but I remember some things." And I said, "Well, what do you remember?" She said, "Oh, I remember you telling me that this gesture," holding my hand open, was a gesture of both giving and receiving. Same gesture. Yeah. Except that she said, "I remember you saying that when your fingers start to curl back in either greed or in some kind of anger, it forms a fist. And that's where much of the violence and the unnecessary suffering in our world comes from." It surprised me that she remembered that. Yeah. So this belonging also, for me at least, entails belonging to self. You know, that means at one level, of course, we care for and nurture our body, heart, and mind. But to belong to myself is more than that. To me, it's a call to action. It's a willingness to stand up on my own behalf and to advocate for myself, maybe for my best self. And that involves a certain kind of radical self-acceptance and embracing of all that we are. And that requires that we get to know ourselves really well, so we can see what we can include. And I think this occurs most often, or most easily, let's say, when we trust our wise heart to be a reliable guide. I mean, our minds will help us discern and discriminate and sort, but our heart almost always is the way we discover what's true. So to belong to ourselves, we need to stop, as we did this morning, and be still and open and allow to all that we are, no part left out. And by doing that, by recognizing or actualizing how we belong to ourselves, we are able to feel our connection with others. So the return to belonging is to reclaim this connection and to act on our own behalf. And I think this requires some measure of love, self-love. Because in a way, what we want to connect with again is that indivisible aspect of our nature. And so we want to move toward what feels real in us. And that wholesome wanting to me is already expressing love and appreciation for our basic nature. And that's essential in our spiritual practice. Without that love, I think our practice is being done for all the wrong reasons. Belonging just is. You can't undo it. We belong simply because we exist. And even if we feel terribly lonely at times, which I have been feeling so much lately. I recently broke up with my partner after 20 years, and I feel very lonely. And even if everything I'm saying feels contradictory, which it does to me sometimes, we still belong. And this belonging isn't dependent on our success or the way we want to be or the shape of our bodies or having a particular belief. We belong even when we feel we don't belong. So I want to stop there, actually. And I want to talk with you, actually. I want to just engage each other around this and inquire a little bit, like, what's your relationship to belonging? Where and to who do you think you belong? And what's your sense of belonging to yourself? And I always want to know what the obstacles are. What gets in the way of belonging? What accommodations have you made in order to belong? What do you have to give up to belong? So I want to explore these things with you and just draw on the collective wisdom of the group. And so maybe if you're online, you can just digitally raise your hand and someone will call on you. I've had some strokes, so I can't see at all. I hardly can see. So someone will call on you because I can't see your pictures in the little boxes. Or if you're there in person, again, someone will call on you and we'll just see, like, where and to who do you belong? What's that feel like? And what gets in the way? What's the obstacle to belonging? Let's just be honest with each other and see what we can discover together. Let's just inquire in a way that helps us see the truth, okay? So, all right, someone be brave enough to raise your hand and speak first, and we'll have a little bit of a dialogue, okay? All right, so.
Thank you.
Who's
Thank
first?
you very much, Frank. I see two hands up already, and one here in the room. So let's do Bob first, and then Paul, and then there will be a question from the room too.
Okay, great. Bob was first, I think.
Yes.
Yes, I'm Bob. I wanted to thank you because you made me realize lots of things, but I never think of or use the word belonging in my life. And so you have me thinking, and you're going to continue. I'm going to continue to be musing on the word belonging. Made me think that belonging gives strength from other people, but it also requires obligations to others too.
And to yourself.
Well, yeah. Sometimes I'm an other for myself too. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's just a way of considering belonging that I will consider to, I hope, muse over the next days and weeks and months. So again, thank you for opening my mind to a word I otherwise don't use.
Wonderful, Bob. I'm glad. And, I want to make sure we look at the shadow side of it, right? I mean, it's not all warm and fuzzy and, unicorns and rainbows. I mean, lots of times, in order to fit in, we've all done this in our life, right? In order to fit in order not to be exiled, we make compromises, we accommodate. And I don't mean in a positive way. I mean, accommodating is it's like when we give up a piece of our soul to please another because we think we need something from them. Yeah. So watch the let's also explore the shadow side and, what we give up in order to belong, or what, how we've been exiled from belonging. Yeah. Okay. Who's next?
That'll be Paul, then the room, and then Tom.
Okay.
Paul, are you still there? Oh, I think you're muted, Paul.
Okay, Frank, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Frank, I want to thank you very much for your talk. It just really got me. When I was growing up, I didn't know I was gay, and it wasn't until 27 where I realized it, and I had no idea why I felt separated.
Right.
I did blame a lot of it on everybody else, but a lot of it was what's wrong with me? I don't feel plugged in. So that's how my life started, and during the pandemic, I really was doing no spiritual practice at all. Oddly enough, that's when I could have increased it, but in terms of being with my groups, like 12-step groups, I haven't even been attending this. I mean, I'm a long time member of this group, and I haven't been very participatory in this, and I realized it's really important to reach out, and it's very hard for me because for 50 years of my life, it wasn't hard at all. I was working and I made a lot of contacts through work, and they would evolve from that. And plus all the gay clubs and baths, that was a good way to meet people too. And it made me think that the excess of sex that I felt I was having for a long time was a real serious attempt to feel connected to a group and to individuals, and that the whole gay explosion was that. I mean, oh my God, the veil has been lifted. We can be ourselves. So let's do it 24/7. So that was kind of a nice thing to think of in terms of this separation thing, and explain a lot of it. I felt like a very bad person for being so excessive some of the time. Other times it felt like I was finding myself. And lately I'm in 77, and I've been thinking about how isolated I feel, and I better really get into my spirituality, because it's not going to get much better in terms of this feeling unless I do. And this has been a very rich week for me. I had a 12-step meeting the other day, and it was people my age, and the subject got on caretaking. And these men said that a lot of them said they were caretaking for their mothers and fathers, and how difficult it was when they're in dementia, and the burden of being a caretaker. And one guy said, but we've had a lot of practice because we went through the AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
And that really got me. It just really got me. And these guys are veteran caretakers.
Yeah.
And it's just really touched me in terms of the gay community. There's only one guy that I was a caretaker with, and he was a breeze.
So Paul, I just want to try and go to essence now, just because so we can give other people a turn.
I'm sorry.
Just go to essence. What do you really want to say? What's important to say?
I'm glad to be reminded that there is a way out of the isolation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the reality is the isolation is a kind of misunderstanding. Right? It's not really recognizing what's true. It's a kind of ignorance. So can I ask you a question, Paul?
Sure.
So what you were saying, like, back in the day, right? There was this explosion of sexuality, and everybody was, and so some of that was just pure fun of it, and the ability to just be, as you said, who I am. but also there's something about belonging that's in that, right? So what did it feel like, just very briefly, what did it feel like to be in exile?
It felt a little bit scary.
Yeah.
You know, like I was a Martian on planet Earth.
Yeah, right. Right. So then we make all these efforts, some skillful, some not so skillful, to reconnect with something that part of us knows is fundamentally true, but we've been living slightly outside it. Yeah. That's why exile feels like we might die, actually. It feels like that. It feels like we might die. We won't be able to survive. Yeah. Yeah. And what you're saying, about the AIDS epidemic, pandemic. I mean, I talked to someone yesterday and they said, we've never had a pandemic like this before. 1 million people dying. And I said, what are you, crazy? Like 700,000 people died, right? Over 30 or 40 years from HIV/AIDS. And I continue to believe it was one of the greatest spiritual movements of our time. And I'm not trying to whitewash it, but the kind of growth that happened and the kind of caregiving you were just describing a moment ago was phenomenal. I mean, probably AA, which you mentioned, and that were have been the two biggest spiritual developments of the 20th century to me. So yes, we know what war is. And yes, there have been other epidemics, and we have not only survived them, but we have grown through them. Yeah. And what did Churchill say? Those who forget, their history are bound to repeat it. I mean, when you think about the political ignorance and the denial that drove, was the driver for the AIDS epidemic, and it's happening again. It's horrible for me that we've forgotten that. Yeah. So thank you for bringing those two things forward. And I'm glad that you're getting a little taste of this belonging, even as we're speaking. Yeah. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks so much, Frank.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, who's next? I don't know. I can't see.
The next question is from the room. I'll just ask, there are two questions from the room. Yeah, so I'll just ask them to speak up because the room is kind of big and the microphone is here.
Okay.
Who do you want to speak first?
You can go first.
Hi, Frank. My name is Mike, and so I wanted to thank you
Mike,
for your talk. And can you hear me? Can you hear?
Yeah, now I can hear. Go ahead.
Thank you for your talk, which I found very, very helpful. I was just simply reflecting that there's a conundrum on the issue between individualism and belonging, and because as much as we in the West privilege our individualism, I always have I guess something of a problem understanding that in relation to Buddhism. I'm still very much a novice Buddhist, I suppose, student. But the other side of that coin, I think, is belonging too much, feeling that one's entire identity is subsumed into a ideology or a community. We see evidence of this in fundamentalism across all religions, across ideology, Trumpism, what's happening to our country in those regards. So I was just thinking, it's a kind of narrow walk. I mean, hopefully, to be able to integrate both aspects of these dimensions.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for bringing that forward. I mean, true. It's like I say, belonging has a shadow side, and we have to be mindful of it. We have to see how we get identified with, for example, a belief system, as you suggested, or our views, or our notion of who we are. Absolutely, it's got a shadow side, and we need to find our way through that. To me, this misunderstanding, in a way, about belonging is the great silent wound of our times. This sense of individualism, which has us believing we have to be apart from, separate from. This is the great silent wound of our times, I think. So thank you for bringing that forward. Absolutely. Yeah. That's, again, the paradox of two truths, right? The ultimate absolute truth, we're not separate. And the relative truth that we are each unique individuals, beautifully unique. And recalling that all the time is holding those two together. As Jung said, when we hold the paradox of opposites, we oftentimes a third understanding emerges that we might not have recognized before. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, we have one more question from the room and then two from Zoom.
Okay. Go for it.
Well, Frank, my name is Mike. I want to thank you very much for what you said, because you're sort of helping me bring some clarity to a number of things that I've been thinking, some of which are like neuroscientific, some of which are spiritual. There's I think it's undeniable, this interconnectedness of not only with one another, but if you just look at ancient cultures and civilizations, how they all strove to live in harmony with the world and the environment, they just knew that they were connected with. And I think, like, when we're in that place, we have an intuitive understanding of that connectedness and the general sense of community that I think goes along with that, even with one another. But there's this other part of our brain where we're the not helpful, that's competitive with a lot of the things that our culture has told us we need to be competitive about, and from our childhood, where we have sort of like based our whole orientation on getting approval and fitting in, and which
Right.
means like denying ourselves and denying that sense of community and connectedness. It's incredibly interesting, but I'm beginning to think that if we can once again experience that intuitive connection to the greater wholeness to which Buddhism speaks,
Yeah.
there's belonging there. But it's a lot of the stuff that we raised or grew up with in order to think that we need it, and that gets in the way.
Absolutely. Good for you for saying that. And, like I say, we got to look at the shadow side. We've got to look at the obstacles, right? That's really important here. Otherwise we get lost in some fairyland of some story that we have about belonging's good, not belonging's bad, and I don't think that's at all helpful to us. And I would suggest, and maybe this feels like a stretch, I would suggest that even that competition that you mentioned is an effort to belong again. Because we think if we win, we'll belong, we'll be acceptable, we'll be, whatever image we have around that, people will appreciate us, like us, honor us, respect us. So even those sometimes unskillful ways or unskillful means are oftentimes driven by the deep longing to belong. Yeah. Not always, of course.
Just to respond to that, I think that's really interesting. You're absolutely right. That does speak of our desire to belong, but the dark side of that is when we go at that, we keep having to do that, and we keep having to succeed in meeting those next expectations in order to make our sense of belonging. Whereas if we sort of experience a greater sense of interconnectedness, there's a greater sense of wholeness there.
Absolutely. And I don't know about you, but my world has always been, I fall off the wagon, so to speak. I go toward, the opposite, the obstacle, until I see through the obstacle. I don't get rid of the obstacle. I haven't gotten rid of a single obstacle in my life. I mean, not a single neuroses. I'm still have all of them. It's just that my relationship to them has shifted. So when you see through the obstacle, then you see the truth that was waiting for you there very patiently all along. Yeah. So the obstacles are really important. No mud, no lotus, right? So thank you for reminding us of the mud, and also to remind us that the mud's important. It keeps us from being, too idealistic, which I think is this biggest hindrance to our spiritual practice, our idealism. Yeah. Okay, who's next? I'm conscious of time.
That will be Tom.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Frank, for very useful, I would say, talk.
I'm a spiritual pragmatist. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll make a very quick question here. I have a friend in upstate New York, Buffalo to be specific, and he's taken care of a disabled uncle most of his adult life, and then his family has kind of, and I think it's some homophobia going on, but his family has kind of dumped him now that the uncle has died, and they'd say, here's the house, it's got a second mortgage on it and everything, and he's disabled, and I'm not quite sure the whole rigmarole around that. But anyway, I'm trying to give him some basic help with, getting some resources in Buffalo, because he desperately needs some. And that, because I don't think he has a sense of belonging to any network, any friends. Just contact some social services in Buffalo. I don't know how to help him, really, I guess.
Yeah. So I don't think I can give you a specific organization,
Sure. Yeah.
but one way that he might find some connection is, there probably is some kind of grief group, or somebody who's doing that kind of work there, some organizations doing that kind of work. And it's my experience anyway, that grief, while it feels terribly fragmented when we're having it, is actually a path to wholeness, actually. And that it might be, it might be really useful to connect with a group of people who have recently lost friends or family and find some common ground there. Yeah.
Thank you. I think his grief is that he's lost his life to this very unappreciative family. And I get a real sort of victim sense from him, but that's the dark side.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it's just a way grief shows up. Grief isn't just sadness, right? It's fear and it's numbness. Like we feel like we're walking through molasses sometimes when we're grieving, or, the sense of isolation. All of those are all phases of grief, right? So
and anger,
encourage him to discover, go to be with a group and discover.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Who else has their hand emerging?
We have time for one more question by Clint now.
Okay. I didn't hear by who?
Clint.
Oh, Clint. Oh, great. Hi, Clint. Oh, you might be muted, Clint.
Yeah. And I know we don't have much time, so I'll try to be concise. It's great to see you again, Frank.
Thank you.
I have Buddhist practice is all about forgiveness, and I totally buy into that.
You do, but I'm going to stop you right there. It's not all about forgiveness.
Oh, okay. Well, a lot of it is about forgiveness. Yeah.
In the West,
that's the message about the importance of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question is, how does forgiveness manifest itself? And I'll give my issue. When I was a child, I had a very abusive father. When I wasn't his personal punching bag, I was just a subject of his verbal abuse. And there's a big mystery why that was. I'm not going to get into that. But I didn't know any better, so I thought the fault was mine. I thought that I didn't live up to somebody who could be lovable. So I would always just kind of like watch him carefully and try to figure out what the signals were. And I was an excruciatingly good little boy. And yet the abuse continued until I was an adult. And so I at a very young age, I got this message that I'm unlovable. And then when I got into adolescence, I got the gay feelings going on. I got all these messages from the outside that the homosexuals are terrible, horrible people. I didn't have anything to back me up. I just continued the message that I was unlovable. Yeah. And I've gone to decades and decades of therapy and psychedelics and spiritual paths, and I've healed a lot. But but not completely. And the thing is, I once took this form of therapy, IFS, internal family systems, and that's all about getting to know all the different selves that are within you, all the different people.
Yeah.
And so some of those people are wonderful. They're playful and funny and courageous and fierce. But there's still this little boy who's just abused and feels that he deserves the abuse because he's unlovable. And I still struggle with that. And I'm in therapy, so we work over it. But the thing is, I'll just go real quick. My father did do some exemplary things. He raised a wife and 3 kids. He was a good provider. I lived a comfortable middle-class life, put me through college, et cetera, et cetera. I can forgive him, but I don't know what that forgiveness is like. I can't nullify how he's harmed me and how I'm still dealing with that harm, how he wounded me. I mean, if there's some kind of afterlife, I don't want him to burn in hell or anything like that. And I try to appreciate, again, like I just said, the positive side, and there are other positive aspects to him too. But how do you forgive? I mean, what is forgiveness? I can't forget what he did. I can't forget the damage.
Right.
I don't know what form my forgiveness would take.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So, boy, this is a whole nother session, Clint, but just very briefly, I'll just say that first, I'm very suspicious of forgiveness that comes too quickly. And I think it's beautiful, and it's been connected to our spiritual practice, as you say, in Buddhism, but also in Judeo-Christian traditions. There is great beauty in forgiveness, but there's also a shadow side of it too. It's connected to superiority also often, like, I'm the big person, I'll forgive you, and so we got to watch the shadows there as well. That's the first thing. The image that's always given around forgiveness is, you're squeezing a hot coal and forgiveness is setting down the coal, right? And it's a nice image, really, but it's a little cliche to me.
Yeah.
There was a woman in our hospice years ago. I met her when she was living in the bushes in Golden Gate Park. She was a Korean woman whose family had thrown her out of her house because she had brain cancer, and they were very ashamed of her. And she was living in the park under some bushes. I met her one day walking through the park. Anyway, I moved her into the hospice, and at one juncture, I raised the question of forgiveness, and I used that image that I just described. And I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "I didn't think about forgiveness as setting down old pain." I said, "Well, what did you think of it as?" She said, "I just wanted to know if I could love again. And if my heart was so full of hatred, I couldn't love again. And so I forgive so that I can love again." And that was a really great reframing of this, And certainly it's not about forgetting. I mean, it's one of the hindrances to forgiveness is we think if we forgive, we'll forget. And the pain that was generated or that we created will somehow happen again. But I think there's a difference between learning the lessons from those painful experiences and holding the emotional tension and the physical tension for our whole lives, thinking we need that in order to remember the lessons learned. So in the end, Clint, and I think forgiveness is always about self-forgiveness. I know it's spoken of as forgiving the other and asking for forgiveness, and those are good kind of structures to consider, but I think it's always, for me anyway, it's always about self-forgiveness. Yeah. It's always about saying, I don't want to carry this baggage anymore. Yeah. It hurts too much in my heart to carry this around. So I'm going to engage in forgiveness because it hurts me too much. Mm. And that feels more real to me than, look, certain actions. I mean, I had a similar upbringing to what you're describing, including all kinds of sexual abuse and all kinds of stuff. And some actions are unforgivable. But the actor, the individual, often they're acting out of, all kinds of horrible things, but also they're often acting out of ignorance. And when I see my own ignorance, it allows me to recognize theirs. Now, okay, wait. I'm going too fast, Frank. I think there are many prohibitions to forgiveness, and that we need to recognize which ones are operating for us. One of them, as we talked about, is confusing forgiveness with forgetting. Another one is confusing forgiveness with reconciliation. I mean, I don't want to reconcile with my sexual abusers. You know, forgiveness is not that. Reconciliation takes two people. I don't want to be with them anymore. I don't want to see them. But I can forgive so that I'm not carrying around this baggage anymore.
Yeah.
You know, another prohibition is justice. We want justice.
Yeah.
Or retribution. We want them to pay for what they did, and we want them to acknowledge what they did, God damn it.
Yeah.
And that's not forgiveness has nothing to do with that. There may never be justice for what happened. And if we wait for justice, for forgiveness, we're screwed. We're carrying it, you know, we'll never be able to escape this pain. We'll never be able to integrate this pain, is a better way to say it. So for me, forgiveness is always about, in the end, is always about self-forgiveness. It's a way of me touching what I have only touched with fear or anger, touching it with some degree of mercy. And often it's looking at the ugliest parts of myself that I don't want to see, that I only see in the other, and touching those again with some degree of kindness and compassion. And not to gloss over it, not to whitewash it, but to integrate it, to metabolize it. And so when forgiveness is in the service of that metabolization, then it's useful. And when it's just about trying to make it all better, I think it's, first of all, it's premature and it's not real. Forgiveness that doesn't include rage and anger and grief is incomplete. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Really, thank you for being honest enough to bring that forward.